We begin with the related powers that Trump is wielding that were put on blast today by Democratic California Senator Alex Padilla. You remember this video that went all around the nation. Today, he gave an unusual address on the Senate floor about that forcible removal at the DHS press conference. Padilla using a special moment in this unusual Senate floor speech to say President Trump is acting like a, quote, tyrant.
Throughout this country's history, we've had conflict, we've had tumult, but we've never had a tyrant as a commander-in-chief. How many Americans in the year 2025 see a vindictive president on a tour of retribution, unrestrained by the majority of this separate and co-equal branch of government, and wonder if it's worth it to stand up or to speak out? No one will redeem America but Americans. No one is coming to save us but us.
No one's coming to save us but us. Padilla stepping up to what might be a different role that started when he had that confrontation at the DHS event, presenting himself as a possibly different kind of Democrat, trying to meet this moment against the backdrop of these unusual displays of force and those protests mentioned. Now, let's be clear about the contrast to his pinning to the ground and handcuffing by those federal agents, which now more people may have seen him in that moment than anything else he might have done in his public career. Well, today he spoke in contrast to that moment. He spoke from the ornate Senate floor, the very seat of his actual elected power, co-equal branch of government, which oversees the department that employs the agents who actually manhandled him to the ground. That's different than how he looked the other day. And while the other day's confrontation did seem to escalate quickly, it did seem somewhat unexpected, including for Padilla, who discussed aspects of that on MSNBC. He spoke to Jacob Soboroff and me that night. So I mention that because that was sort of unexpected, and both sides referred to it because the DHS folks, in their statements defending it, sort of tried to act like, well, this all kind of popped up in the moment. And that's a contrast to today. Another less prominent Democrat, New York City official Brad Lander, who's running for mayor, was arrested in a hallway outside an immigration court as he locked arms with a person ICE agents were seeking to detain. You can see the somewhat dramatic video, the clash, the people there. Now, this has drawn notice and comparisons, but it's actually distinct from Padilla's interaction. And if Democrats or other activists are courting more direct clashes like this, including with federal agents, it may reflect that some in today's evolving resistance want chances to do civil disobedience, or in their view, to highlight what they see as an overreach of federal agents under the Trump administration. And by the way, that has a long tradition in America. But it's also factually and legally different from a situation where you might think or observe that agents are openly seeking these clashes or even escalating these moments on their own. DHS says that Lander basically impeded a law enforcement officer. That's a potential crime. No charges have yet been brought.
Judicial warrant. You have a judicial warrant. You have a judicial warrant. Had I seen the judicial warrant? Had I seen the warrant? I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it? Where is the warrant? I have my hand here. I would like to see the warrant. Take it to see the warrant. Take it back. Take it back. Step back. You don't have authority. You don't have authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Sir, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens.
You can see Lander there speaking. You can see, by the way, that video was released by his office. And he is a candidate right now running for mayor. All of that is context. But you can also see what looks like quite a difficult scenario for everyone involved. And so we are witnessing in kind of real time how these things are going down. I mentioned the long history of civil disobedience, not to say it's exactly the same, but the civil rights movement, a lot of black and brown activists and allies of those movements did all of these kind of things, the sit-ins and efforts sometimes to be arrested, going in knowing you're going to be arrested. Now, we don't know whether with Padilla and some of these other incidents that seem to happen. We also know that there are other ongoing cases against elected Democrats that look more punitive, and judges will have to decide if they think that is overreach, if the Trump administration is literally trying to round up, arrest, and imprison the opposition. I also want to turn to the important but somewhat more dry process as promised inside that appeals court in California. The panel of judges hearing arguments over Trump's federalization of the National Guard and DOJ lawyers defending how Trump called up those forces.
Our view is that this statute commits the decision whether to call up the forces to the president's unreviewable discretion. So no, there's no role for the court to play in reviewing that decision.
No role at all, even if the president gives no reasons and there are no facts offered by that president to support that president's decision.
That's correct, because if the statute is unreviewable, it's unreviewable.
If it's unreviewable, it's unreviewable. Now, this is not one of those out-of-bounds bananas arguments that we sometimes hear in these court cases, even if it does sound pretty stark. In other words, at the limits of what the DOJ is saying, be a lot of power for any president or this president. But let's just go through it in plain English. The DOJ is just arguing that for courts, they think the National Guard is like deploying the actual military. And it is a power that presidents usually wield with no review by judges in real time. In other words, if a president goes to war in Iraq with or without Congress or does a military operation, typically you don't see judges come in and interfere with that in real time. Now, California has the counter argument that the National Guard is different and different than the military precisely because it involves a dueling power of the state. And under that thing called federalism, states do have everything you know about when you live in a state. Even if you're not like the biggest government expert, you probably look around and know, yeah, we have this state government, right? Local police, not federal agents. The FBI is not on your, subway or pulling you over on the highway usually. And you have your governor, and you have rules that are written in that state and your own law enforcement. All of that is state power, and that America, according to governors like Gavin Newsom and the lawyers he sent to argue this case today, America's never been run completely out of D.C. with no regard for that structure.
It should also consider the profound effect on our federal structure of government and the balance of power between states and the federal government. Our framers made the decision, it's reflected in the text of Article 1's militia clauses, to generally leave to state governments control over the militia, today the National Guard.
That's the California counterargument. And I'll just tell you straight up, this is one of those times where both arguments are decent, because the military is a bigger deal, and that is not reviewable, to use the jargon, or not something the judges are messing with day to day. But on the California side, yeah, the state has power. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this whole system if any president could just overrule it any time with no facts, as the judge warned. And California is not freelancing here. This isn't just some Newsom-Trump thing. There's a cornerstone in the United States democracy on separation of powers and a state system of powers. It's very striking, by the way, that we just had these protests about no kings, because one of the ways the founders originally wanted to ward off the king-like power from the very top of the government to send your agents in anywhere in the country was that they would have localized powers, state powers, federalism, to distinguish the U.S. from the kings of England.
Our nation cannot bind together without powerful central government. But we must also accommodate the needs of our constituent states. The power of one must check and balance the other.
States balance the federal power. You can believe John Adams or Paul Giamatti's version of John Adams, which I gotta believe is as charismatic or more so. And anybody who knows anything about power knows that at the end of the day, it's not about what's written in the little books and the rules, precedents. Power is about power, which comes down to the guns and the arms. We're a country that's had many big debates about that. But the state power is that you have police and National Guard under the state governor. They really do control law enforcement and safety in their respective states, not the FBI most of the time. And if you do want to put on a political hat here tonight as we make sense of all these related controversies, for a very long time in the modern era, it was Republican leaders who said a lot about respecting state power, which Donald Trump obviously isn't. He's in court today trying to overrule a governor on the National Guard. Reagan warned against all of that kind of federal power aggrandizement.
We must remove government's smothering hand from where it does harm. We must seek to revitalize the proper functions of government. But we do these things to set loose again the energy and the ingenuity of the American people.
The people through the states and their local government first, and the feds as a last resort. That was Reagan Republican politics. Trump has a very different idea, federalizing the troops, aggrandizing his power, unilateral authority, and telling the courts to back out. Now, there's talk about the reasoning. The law in question actually requires an invasion or rebellion. The president would deploy the Guard only in those cases. And if Donald Trump gets his way, then maybe this statute sort of fades away and an order favoring Trump would empower him to use the Guard not only in California, but if he wins this case and it's open season, in every state in the land. And that would be whether John Adams likes it or not.